Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very special program. My name is Jyoti Menon. I'm a member of the class of 2001 and a proud graduate, president of the Alumni Association of Barnard College and alumna trustee. We have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Mary Commerford, director of the Furman Counseling Center, who will speak momentarily about strategies to help deal with the anxiety, grief, and uncertainty that COVID-19 has created in our lives. Dr. Commerford has been the director of the Furman Counseling Center for 16 years. Previously, she was the eating disorder specialist and postdoctoral fellowship training coordinator at New York University. She has a Ph.D. in clinical psychology from Fordham University, a master's in divinity from Yale University Divinity School, and an AB in theology and philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. Her professional interests and specialties include eating disorders, psychoanalysis, spirituality in women, and young adult concerns. Dr. Commerford, thank you for joining us today. I now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jyoti, and thank you to the Development Office for inviting me. And I want to really start off by thanking a couple of alums, Jennifer Parosini and Liza Bove. They contacted the Development Office maybe over a month ago, asking about something like this, and it was their idea. And I actually got the opportunity to speak with them last week and kind of hear their experience of how things have gone, the Barnard alums that they know, sort of trying to get a little bit of the take of the Barnard alum experience of this COVID pandemic and isolation time. So thank you both for that. I think that was really helpful. So I initially developed this presentation for the students, which you'll see as we go through, but I hope it applies to everyone. So let me try to share my screen here. And of course it's not there, hold on. Nope.
Mary, I will share the presentation for you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Patricia. Great, thank you. All right. So in starting out, can we go to the first slide first, please? Thanks. I also want to thank Jeffrey Ng from Fordham University and Larry Long from the University of Kansas Medical Center. They actually shared some of the really wonderful PowerPoints in this presentation. So thank you. Okay, next slide. So this sort of captures where we are, I think. For those of us old enough to remember Peanuts, I think people are feeling a sense of impending doom. People have talked about this experience as being apocalyptic. There's a tremendous anxiety, people's sense of foreboding, what's going to happen, a loss of feeling of safety. So I think, you know, in a sense, we're all in this together. But at the same time, I really want to acknowledge that although we're all experiencing this, we are not experiencing the same things. There are people who are essential workers who are taking risks every day. There are people who have families who are essential workers who go out and then come in and risk infecting their family. There are people who have been infected themselves, are people who have family members who are ill. There are people who have lost people. So there are also the entire realm of people who've been laid off from their jobs, people who are worried about making rent or who have food insecurity, housing insecurity. So although we're all in this together, we're really differentially impacted. And I want to really acknowledge that. So in trying to craft this presentation, I'm going to speak sort of generally for coping, but recognizing that many people are dealing with much greater risk and stress than others. Okay, thank you. So I thought a good and helpful model would be to use Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. She developed this when working with death and dying in the 1970s and 1980s. And I think one way to manage our feelings is to articulate them, kind of unpack them and put words on them and express them, and that has a containing function. So using her model of grief, she divided it into a number of sections. So grief is actually a complex amalgam of different feelings: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Okay. These stages, as she stressed even at the time, are not linear. People don't necessarily proceed one from the other. They may stay in one stage the entire time. But these are just a way to kind of unpack, I think, the complexity of some of our emotional experience now. And near the end of her career, David Kessler joined her, and he worked on adding a sixth stage called creating meaning, which I think is really important and essential for us. Okay. So stage one, denial. If you can remember, I think we were all sort of thinking, oh, this virus won't affect us. It's not going to leave China. We're going to hold it down. Or even when it was coming, there was a sense, well, it's not going to affect me. I don't have risk factors. There's a lot of reasons we find to think something's not going to apply to us. And in many ways, this is a healthy defense, but in other ways, it's not a productive defense. So it leads people to a lot of shock, avoidance. They can't believe it, a sense of unreality, disorientation. Okay. Anxiety and fear is where we start anticipating something bad is going to happen. And this pandemic naturally lends itself to that, right? We're worried about the health and safety of ourselves, people we care about. Students are very worried about their classes, what's going to happen, what happened to their internships this summer, what's going to happen with the job market for seniors, how are people going to pay their bills financially. People are worried about food supplies, job insecurity, housing security. So this has created a network of anxiety at every level, including at the level of some of our most basic needs. Anger is a classic stage, and some we may have visited during the course of this time. Feeling really imposed upon. You're making me stay home. You're taking away my activities. This is disrupting. I don't feel in control of my life anymore. Anger can be expressed toward decision makers like politicians, people in authority in the health divisions, Barnard administrators. And anger can be targeted at communities. As we all know, Chinese, Asian, and Asian American communities have been really targeted at this time. Bargaining, this is sort of a classic example. More people who believe in God tend to do this one. It's sort of like, well, if I do this, then it'll be okay. Or if I do this kind of thing. So if I social distance, everything's going to be okay. There's kind of a bargaining relationship with God to ward off anything bad happening. Depression. After initially, I think when people started to stay home and not go to work and isolate, there was a lot of like adrenaline in all of those activities and anxiety and what's going to happen. And then a few weeks in, that adrenaline slowly slows and people just sort of collapse into blah, depressed, lethargic, more hopelessness. There's a lot of loss happening, both in terms of just plans that they may have had, loss perhaps of the sense of safety and security, perhaps loss of people and loved ones. And in addition, there can be loneliness, boredom, feeling helpless. So this has been, I think, a very painful stage that a number of people are experiencing. And then acceptance was the final stage for Dr. Kubler-Ross. And it was kind of like reaching the point of saying, okay, this is happening. I need to figure it out now. And once we sort of reach acceptance, there's a little bit more peacefulness. and a sense of, all right, what can I do? There's less resistance internally, and we can start taking some action. And then finally, this is the additional stage that David Kessler created, is finding meaning. And I think this is really key for us during this time, if we can get there. Not everybody can be interested in finding meaning all the time. Sometimes we're just in another place. But if we can find meaning in what is this experience, what can we learn from this? Meaning helps us make sense of grief and move forward. So, you know, there's a lot of this now around. People are saying, what is this saying about the students, for example, who are home with their families? What can they learn about family dynamics? Are there things they can learn to shift or do better in communicating with their families? Couples are sort of encountering the struggles that they've always had. Are there ways they can learn to do better? Even more broadly, our healthcare system, are there things we can improve? Our societies in terms of, you know, network and support for individuals. And then there can be global evaluation of meaning. You know, how can we care for one another better? How can we care for the environment better? So there are many, many levels at which we can begin to find some meaning of this experience for us. And it's very individualized. Everybody's sort of on their own journey to make meaning. Some people turn to activism or volunteering. Some people really focus on gratitude and developing their relationships. Other people try to do things that will memorialize this time. Our people, artists have a wonderful means of channeling their experience into art and creating expressions of this time that can really be transforming and healing. So I think for times when we can reach this point, this can be a really helpful way to manage some of the stress that we're experiencing. Okay, next slide. So that sort of describes a little bit of the complexity of the emotional realities that we're struggling with. Now I want to talk a little bit about how to manage those realities, how to cope, how to maintain resilience. And the first one is, in many ways, I think the most important thing, practicing self-compassion. I think particularly people who are quite high achieving, and I know Barnard alum tend to be in that category, have very, very high expectations of themselves, almost relentlessly all the time, and a lot of impatience with struggle. And so we often, you know, want to coach ourselves to treat ourselves as we would treat our dearest friends, with great kindness, with understanding, with patience, with flexibility, and not expect, you know, constant high performance, and even maybe reward times of not performing as well, and recognizing that that's progress to allow oneself the entire range of their experience. So self-compassion and kindness, I think, are one of the key things in handling this experience. Okay. Limiting social media. I know when we were in the high point of cases in the hospitals, I would watch the news at night and I just noticed my anxiety and the chemicals in my body start secreting the stress chemicals, and I would just become even more stressed and anxious. And I thought, this isn't helpful. It's not helpful for me to watch the news and work myself up into a stress state. So we want to be careful about what we expose ourselves to. It's fine to be informed. Maybe you want to read news from a very reliable source, but be mindful about what you're exposing yourself to, what you're able to read, and try to be informed but not flooded or overwhelmed. Be protective of what you're taking in. Okay. Social connections are essential. We are hardwired neurologically to need social interactions. When we're alone, we sit with our own thoughts, our own feelings, and our body chemistry just generates whatever it does in response to our internal states. And we just stew in that when we're alone. But when we're with other people, we respond to their psychological states and their body chemistry, and we start to shift, and it can really relieve us and get us out of some difficult emotional states of mind. So it's really important to be with people. And even though we're social distancing, we don't want it to be emotional distancing. So here's a kind of fun slide. Whoops, can we go back? It was a fun slide about ways to social distance and sing and dance. I was noticing TikTok is having this resurgence of dance and dance competitions, and professional dancers are on there now. I think it's a wonderful way to connect and be together. And using the body with voice or dancing is also a wonderful way to connect. Okay, next slide, please. But whatever your way of being connected, here's a long list of other ways. Some people are watching Netflix movies together. People are playing charades. I talked to one student who has breakfast once a week with one of her friends. They have a date and they Zoom in and they share breakfast and chat. Some people have joined a book club or a journal club. There's so many things you can do to stay connected, and it's really important. Make a date and put it on your schedule. It's really key. Okay. So speaking of putting it on your schedule, it's very important too that we maintain as much as we can a structure and a routine. Now, we don't want to be rigid about it or use it as something to beat ourselves up, because that's not the point. But for all of us, if we have a day where there's nothing to do, there's no structure, we're more likely to collapse into depression, feeling blah, maybe anxiety will start to stew. Whereas if we have some kind of structure of a plan for the day, a few things to do, it just contains and binds our emotional state in a very helpful way. So structure and routine held very flexibly are really good things for us. Also, please protect your sleep and your food. I know now I've heard many people are having trouble sleeping. They may have trouble, I'm not finished with sleep. They may have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. And if that's your case, think about maybe an over-the-counter medication just for a few days to get your sleep back on track. The same with food. I know many people are having either loss of appetite or having emotional eating, or they may just feel nauseated, but try to get food on board regularly, because food and sleep form the floor that we stand on. And even when things are very difficult, if we have good sleep and food, we're much more able to handle it. And exercise too can really help relieve stress. Okay, thanks. Next slide. Gratitude, back to gratitude. Gratitude is psychologically essential, and they've done more and more research in it, and they found that even people who are in a time of terrible tragedy, if they can find moments of things that are, helpful, special, it will help balance their coping. For example, let's say you have a family member who's ill and you're trying to care for that person, and you may also be very worried about protecting other people from getting sick, and it's an enormously stressful, difficult time. So there's all of that, but maybe friends are checking in and being supportive, or maybe they're going out and buying some food or bringing some cooked meals in, or maybe they're picking up some prescriptions for you. Just noticing those moments where you can feel gratitude and appreciating things will help balance and contain the tragedy, grief, and terrible anxiety that people can feel. So even when things are at their most difficult, looking for and kind of highlighting a special moment will help you hang in there. Say there are people who are outside and they may just even notice a bird song. To just hold that for a moment can really help to balance the sort of despair and grief when going through a difficult crisis time. So for all of us, whether we're in a difficult crisis time or a moderate crisis, cultivating a sense of gratitude. Some people at the end of the day write a journal of several things they felt grateful for that day. Some people make a note to thank somebody at the end of each day for something that they did. Anything that will help you change this mindset and kind of balance and reflect that there are some beautiful moments even in the context of all this stress. So vulnerability, and this is one that really came up with the alums that when we spoke last week. I think particularly for sort of the culture of Barnard and the Barnard alum and the Barnard student is to sort of be exceptional and strong and competent at all times. And I think that that's a trap in many ways, because honestly, what we need to do to get through this time is to really accept and welcome our vulnerability. And what that means is let the negative emotions come and go through us, express them. Don't try to shove them in a closet and move on, or repress them, or feel you shouldn't be having those feelings. There's a saying about emotions, what we resist will persist. So if you're having an emotion, try not to judge it, but just allow it. Allow the full range of your feelings, what's going on in your bodies, in your mind, and just make that okay. I think that's really important. So here's an example. We want to cultivate room for all of our different mental and emotional states. So we can feel grateful that we have many good things going in our life. We may be safe, we may feel privileged in many ways, but that doesn't mean we aren't also disappointed about things, or maybe down or depressed about things. You can feel both things. It shouldn't be an either or. Or we can, yes, really feel blessed and enjoy extra time with loved ones, and also feel really irritated and annoyed and overwhelmed by their presence. It's not an either or. We want to make room for all of our feelings and all of our different states of mind. Another thing that helps is simply getting outside. And I know I've been hearing for people who live in the city, it's a little frightening because more and more people are out there and it's harder to social distance. But if you can get out and keep 6 feet distance from one another, it's very helpful. It's psychologically very helpful. If you can't get outside, even to open a window and get some fresh air still helps. It helps to change our body chemistry. And while you're out there, some people like to run, some people walk, some people just walk around and they see what can they hear out there? What do they see? What do you feel? Right now the sun is out. Can you feel the sun on your body, on your face? Can you smell? Like I'm in the suburbs and sometimes I smell fresh cut grass. Or now there's a lot of pollen, but just going out, tapping into your senses. What all am I experiencing while I'm outside? That really helps us shift gears, and it also helps change our body chemistry. If you have a dog, it's great. It's a great excuse to take your dog for a walk. Can you hit the next slide? Some dogs don't want to keep walking. They feel they've been walking constantly, but you don't need a dog to go outside, of course. Dogs, they're saying now how animals are such wonderful companions during this time, and animals definitely lower our blood pressure and really help us cope with stress. But even if you don't have an animal, try to get yourself outside because it's a healing experience. Okay. And then strategies just for coping. These are sort of self-care things. And I know sometimes people are impatient with self-care. They're like, that's just kind of woo-woo stuff, or I don't have the money to spend on a yoga class or things like that. And they sort of push it away as not for them. But I think the fact is, in order for us to function and take care of others, we have to really take care of ourselves first. There's a lot of research on motivation. And as we go through the course of our day and do a lot of things, our motivation and drive for working erodes. It's kind of like a gas tank that goes down. And what literally resupplies this motivation or resupplies our gas tank are things like play, fun, delicious food. That kind of thing literally helps us with motivation and drive. So find what supplies you, what's great, and make time for it. It's essential. Some people like cooking, some people like journaling, some people are doing exercise videos. There's museum virtual tours. You can visit zoos. You can learn a language. You can take a free class. There's so many things you can do online. Anything that will nourish you and supply you is going to help you and give you energy for handling everything you're dealing with. Okay. Then try to monitor how you're thinking about things. Like there's some things that are now in our control and so much right now that's not in our control. And focusing on what's not in our control really doesn't help. Can I have the next slide? So here's an example. Like we can limit our social media, we can find fun things to do, we can keep social distancing. Those are things we can control. And if we focus on that, we feel like, okay, I have agency, I'm managing. But if we focus on things we have no control over, like other people who are not social distancing, or will there be toilet paper in the grocery stores, that just makes us feel more kind of at the mercy of outside forces and more helpless and a little more frantic. So kind of bringing in the focus to things that are within our control will help us continue to feel sort of the captain of our own ship, which is psychologically a helpful feeling. Okay. And then finally, I want to talk about mindfulness meditation. You know, mindfulness is so popular now. And many of you probably already know it, or you may have a mindfulness practice. But mindfulness is essentially bringing your attention to the now moment. And for most of us, this precise moment of now is bearable. Of course, there are people who are in terrible crisis times where the moment of now is fairly unbearable, and in which case they just need to focus on coping with that. But for the majority of us, this moment of the now is at least bearable. And bringing our attention now, not worrying about the future, not focusing on other areas, just what's happening right now. So we ask ourselves, what's going on in my body right now? What do I feel in my body? What's going on in my thoughts? What am I thinking about right now? What's going on in my emotional self? What are my feelings? And just looking at different parts of ourselves, just where am I right now? And we want to look at that without judgment, just observe it. And we may be all over the place. Like in the morning, we may feel, oh, I feel very grateful and I'm feeling good. And then 30 minutes later, I'm really irritable and I'm at, and then 2 hours later, I'm at my wit's end, I've had it. Just observe it, make it okay. It's all right. And the interesting thing is, if we can just accept and observe it and let it move through us, it will release itself faster. It's when we get tight and judgmental, or I shouldn't be feeling this, or this is wrong, or what's wrong with me, that locks in that emotional state and we stay stuck. If we can just observe it like, oh, I'm really losing it right now. I guess I need a break. Or, wow, I'm feeling really grateful right now. Just observe it and let it be without judgment. Okay. And then here's a little moment of Zen from Lao Tzu. It says, if you're depressed, that means you're living in the past and you're reworking it and trying to change things. If you're anxious, you're running into the future, projecting bad things. Whereas if you're at peace, you're in the present moment. And I think it was Mark Twain who said something similar. I think he said something like, I've been through many terrible things in my life, and some of them actually happened. So I think he was capturing how, and he was a man who had many tragic events actually, but his mind, just like ours, runs in and worries about terrible things that might happen in the future. And it just keeps us in an anxious, elevated state in a way that's not very helpful. And then finally, here are some recommended apps for mindfulness. Many of them are quite famous. Headspace, I know, Buddhify, Calm. Many of the students are now using 10% Happier. Many of these apps do have a cost to them, but they also offer some services that are free. So if you're interested in this and you think it might be helpful, please check them out, see what you think. We recommend them to the Barnard students often. And then finally, this was the last slide for the Barnard students, really stressing that Barnard is there for them. And what I want to emphasize, which I emphasize to Barnard students as well, is it's actually a sign of strength to ask for help. Because in order to ask for help, you have to have the courage to recognize and face that something's not working. And that takes courage and strength more than avoiding it or pretending it's not true. So really seeking out help and support is a ticket for success, and it's a sign of strength, of character. So I really recommend it to all of us. This is really a time to reach out to our support networks. Thank you. Okay, so are we moving to chats, to questions?
Hi, Mary. Yes, the Q&A is at the bottom.
Great, okay. All right. Stages of grief. What is the object that's lost in the situation of the pandemic? I think that there are multiple losses to in this pandemic. First of all, there are concrete losses of people who have lost jobs, who are losing income, people who are losing a sense of safety and security, people whose families or they themselves are essential workers that are out in the workforce. What we all need essentially is a sense of security and safety, and that includes having a home, having food, having supplies. And I think for many people, this pandemic has literally hit at some of our core safety needs. Then other levels of need, I think, are worry about illness and that level of safety, as well as the loss of freedom to travel, the loss of spending time with friends or families, the loss of going to restaurants, even going to movies, doing things that nourish and support us and even distract us from psychological stress. And then there are people who have literally lost people. I mean, the death rates in New York and Westchester and Long Island alone are very high. And so there are multiple levels of losses here. Tips for dealing with anxiety related to procrastination. Well, this is paradoxical, but this is what I always recommend to students. When you're feeling like you need to procrastinate, accept it and take a break. I think quite often pushing against procrastination and resisting it locks it in a little bit. I think if you can just say, okay, this isn't working right now, I can't really work right now, what do I need? Do I need to do something fun? Do I need to eat some good food? Do I need to go talk to a friend? Kind of take it as a time to tune in and say, okay, I'm not able to work right now. What is it that I need? And using that as a window in to understand and respond to your emotional needs may help the procrastination. Okay, somebody wants a copy of the presentation. I think that this is recorded. So I'm sure the development office will tell you how to find it. There's a painter who's painting beautiful flowers. No, I would say allow your, and they want to know, are they in denial? No, I would say allow your creative process. I mean, I think we all need to really trust our emotional process now without a lot of doubts and judgments. And if you're creating beauty, what a gift. What a gift. Please don't doubt that. I've lost my job and I struggle with feeling competent and too old in the job market. Any advice for how to feel good about myself while job hunting? I understand this. I think that, again, the thing to do is to accept the vulnerable feelings and make it okay. Talk to friends who can share things. Try to develop, if you can, if it's not too excruciating, some moments of humor about your situation. If you can reach places of humor, that can help to transform the experience. Also looking for meaning, like what am I to learn now? What is here for me? I know that sounds kind of Pollyannish, and when we're really in a bad crisis, it can feel offensive, and I don't mean to be that at all, but to just recognize it's a miserable situation. Ageism is a reality that's painful and makes us afraid, but it's not the only thing, that there are still opportunities, and to kind of Also catch yourself if you're being too globally negative. That might be a sign that you're letting anxiety sweep you away. There are definitely hopeful components, so connect with people that will help you hold those as well. Okay, what specific language or strategies can we offer with people who are being super positive and you're concerned about a family member who's an essential worker? Difficult to be urged to be upbeat. Yes, I hate being urged to be upbeat. I entirely understand that, and particularly when you feel your concerns are valid. I think this gets to a kind of issue. Many of us are now living with family members or partners who may be responding to the situation differently. What I hear a lot is different family members have different levels of anxiety or caution, and it's making other family members terrified or scared. So I think whenever we're with people with difference, a big challenge is how can we handle differences? And one temptation, I think, is to judge the other person as being wrong. Like, I can't believe they're going out, they're taking risks, they're not wearing a face mask, what's wrong with them? It's making me scared, it's risking people at home, and get very judgmental. I think the key is to accept some people have different levels of anxiety. They may perceive the risk as quite different, and to approach it that way as a conversation, like, I'm feeling anxious and you're not feeling anxious. Do you really feel there's no risk? I'd like to understand your perspective, and I'd like you to understand my perspective. And if you can both sort of get a little deeper at where you're feeling, that may help address those differences and manage those different responses. I'm feeling tremendous guilt about not being emotionally available to those I love and feel obliged to care for. How could I manage both these feelings and caring for people? Well, this gets to the point of, unless we take care of ourselves, we don't have any gas in our tank to take care of others. So please stop beating yourself up about it, because that doesn't help at all. But to say, you know, this is a miserable time, I'm really struggling here, I'm going to have deep compassion for myself, set aside some things that will nourish me and help supply my gas tank, and then I will probably have more energy to devote to those people. So I would really try to soften the guilt and the beating yourself up and do things to supply yourself, because that is essential. Advice for dealing with reemerging issues, regressing in progress with other mental health problems, especially disordered eating tendencies. Yes, we're having a lot of students are struggling too. It's a time. I think at difficult times, there's always a natural regression. And paradoxically, what I would encourage you to do is just say, okay, I'm regressing right now, and not judge it, but that maybe, oh, maybe I binged, or maybe I fell back into some old eating patterns right then. Rather than judging that and getting very upset, which, remember, what we resist will lock in that experience, instead say, what was I experiencing then? What can I learn from? What is my emotional self trying to tell me that I need to hear? And just, again, being deeply compassionate and trying to listen, because our behaviors are indicating our emotional states, which have messages for us to learn. One of the biggest challenges I'm having is managing work and online learning with kids. Yes, I have staff members who are pulling out their hair. My patience often feels tested, and I'm trying my best. If you can, humor. And also, honestly, if you can do this, give up sometimes. I mean, I'm going by what my staff is doing, and they are both using humor and just giving up sometimes. I think there are times you just can't fight it, and surrender can be the best. I'm not saying surrender forever, but to kind of stop the struggle. If you have a child who just doesn't want to do it, accept that. It's kind of like the procrastination problem. Okay, this is where we are right now. What do we need to do instead? And be very responsive to that. And using kind of humor and flexibility, I think, will help people go far. Okay, any tips in making major life decisions during this time? Yeah, that's tough. I'm considering selling my home, changing my lifestyle, and moving myself and my children. How do I keep my mindful focus to make the right decision around big decisions like this in such an emotionally chaotic time? I find it hard to move past fear and connect directly with my intuition. Yes, that's so hard, isn't it? A time of deep fear to get past that. And this is a tricky time. You know, I've asked myself too many times, who will I be after this and how will my needs have changed? And I think it's normal to think of big life issues. This is an existential time where many of us are thinking of big life issues. I would say to both explore those possibilities and also hold the other piece of, I may be frightened now and I may not make the best decision right now, and be watchful about that. So what I would recommend is trying to hold both mindsets, exploring new possibilities, feeling how it feels, if you feel excited, if there's some joy, but also holding that this is a time of fear and panic sometimes, and that you don't want to rush into anything. It's a time to be very, very careful, but make room for both kinds of experience. Okay, any tips for supporting a partner grieving the loss of a parent? Oh, this I think is so hard. And everyone grieves differently. So what I would recommend is asking the partner what they need from you, what could be most helpful, because our experience and what we imagine might not be what they need. So I would just be guided by them, and hopefully they can help you with that. How do you be social? Let's see. How do you be social and support friends who are struggling mentally if you're also having a hard time? Yes. Again, you want to hold both. You want to support them, but set limits. Because remember, we can't take care of others if we don't take care of ourselves first. And so setting limits and boundaries, saying, I love you, but I can only talk a few minutes right now. I have to go do this. So you're telling them you love them, you're there for them, but you're also setting some limits. I think holding the two things together is essential. And referring them for professional help if they're not there, because it's not fair that family members and friends should carry the weight of people's emotional struggles if they possibly can get some professional support. What to do about family member who's taking out frustration and anger on you? Yes, I think this is happening a lot probably. You know, the classic advice for this kind of conflict resolution is to use an I statement, like, I felt hurt when you spoke to me that way. I felt scolded, or I felt diminished, or I felt that you know, try to use I statements, not you statements, and then see if they can respond, because what you want to know is what's going on underneath their anger. When people are angry, there's a vulnerability underneath. So when you're resolving conflict, you want to try to get underneath the anger and defensiveness to hear what the vulnerability is. And if you can get there, that's the way to transform that conflict. I'm just going to grab this one because it's one of my own interests. Advice with spiritual issues. Where is God in this? I'm also a deeply spiritual person, and I think this is the question that many of us who have a spiritual life are asking. And I think the search for that is also the meaning of that, and everyone will find their answer. You know, people across the ages have asked that question at times of great suffering. Where is God in this? And I think asking that question and opening to the experience is part of the answer. I lost my husband to the coronavirus. Oh, I'm so sorry. All was well, and within 2 weeks he was dead. I just finished sitting Shiva. So many things to take care of. Many people are reaching out to me. I can't even return all the calls. I'm worried about how I will cope when the world gets back to itself. Everyone I know is home along with me. I think I could stay at home forever. I don't want to re-enter the world without him. I absolutely understand, and what you're experiencing is so normal. I think to the best that you can, allow the people who are reaching out to you to be with you, and just allow yourself your experience. Try not to push away aspects, as I said, to just observe, this is how I feel now. And what you just expressed was a beautiful way of expressing that grief and accepting it in yourself. And of course, the fear of one of the hardest part of griefs beside the sadness is fear. Fear of how can I live without this person? how will I be safe in the world without this person? And allowing that, and then letting people in your community step forward to be with you. That can help to soften that. But I am so sorry for your loss. Another source for an app. Oh, okay, here's another app. It's called PTSD Coach. It's a great app for PTSD and anxiety and OCD symptoms. That's true. Many people who have some OCD stuff, it's kicking up high. It's for civilians as well as military people. Thank you, Liza, so much. That's great. PTSD Coach. Okay. That looks like the last one.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Commerford, for such helpful advice that you've shared with all of us today. I know I personally appreciated it, and I'm sure all of our alumni who were listening did as well. So thank you so much for your time. And to all of our guests, of course, thank you for joining us today. And please remember, take care of yourselves and each other. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.